I suppose in its broadest sense, the themes of my work are probably history, mortality, memory, time, family even maybe. So my studio is a Lang hut that came from a World War II airfield. So when I graduated and moved into using that space, I quickly became quite interested in the history of that building. So I did an exhibition in 2006 about the history of Western Zoyland, and kind of snowballing out of the really good response that I got to that, I became interested in The Great Escape. I read the true life account of The Great Escape, and from that I found that the last of the 50 to be executed after the true life escape was from Taunton. Through Google and all the rest of it, I found that he was actually an old boy of Jewish grammar school. I work as technician part-time at Rich Jewish College, which is the successor to the grammar school, and talking to the management of the college, no one was really aware of this connection. So I was encouraged by them and my own interest to kind of explore that subject matter further.
My practice is very interested in almost like autobiographical work, but I do feel that you have to be very clever to use yourself, like Francesca Woodman, for example. However, I went through examples of trying to use myself in this particular piece. However, it didn't really work, so I chose to use somebody else. Basically, I've been really interested in Roland Barthes's writings on camera lucidia and the idea of the spectacle and the idea of posing. And basically, because I think it relates hugely back to paintings as well, 19th century paintings, etc., and of Goya paintings and Caravaggio paintings, etc., of like basically poses and gestures and the connotations that can be brought across by using certain poses.
Despite plywood being a kind of very basic building material and sort of fairly cheap really in terms of wood, other woods don't really interest me as much. It's the whole sort of idea of really working back and revealing the layers within the wood. So yeah, still really interested in these materials. The idea that the viewer is really aware of what's happening on the surface and the kind of two-dimensionality of the plane and the marks kind of interacting with each other and the relationships of the marks with each other, but also the idea that there can be a kind of deeper space as well within these flat images that the viewer can sort of be drawn into.
To start with, you do essentially need a kick because it's quite easy to come out and you've just come out of a degree with you're battling finance as well, and you want to kind of like keep producing but also have the same luxury of like having the money
and friends that work 9 to 5.
Yeah, exactly. That is, as Kitty said, finding that balance really.
I think it's just important as well to feel like part of a network as well, because I think if because I was in Bath my degree, and a lot of my friends from Bath, they either didn't sort of pursue arts or they went to London. They didn't sort of hang around in Devon and Somerset, and so for me being part of Somerset Artworks was invaluable really, because it's just reassuring to know there are other young artists sort of around, and they're all, and I think our work's really different, but we all kind of have really similar, not problems, but sort of issues and sort of things that we have to consider with making our work. So I think it's just feeling part of something bigger, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, something you've touched on there. So, going back to the studio point, as I mentioned, the studio has kind of formed the starting point of my practice in many ways. And I think I always would have made work without that space, but it would probably be incredibly different from what it is now. And that, I came back from uni, this space was available to me, and I, gradually turned it into my studio space. But within that space, I'd kind of created quite an, like you're saying, quite an isolated practice. I was actually invited recently to be part of the exhibition that's on the Brewhouse now about artists at work. And I actually was a little unsure about that because I've become so used to working in that kind of isolated way that my studio space has become very much my private working space, and then things like this, exhibitions and my presentation. Open studios at the moment is the middle ground, but it's more of an exhibition than a display of my working practices, I think. But I think the other key point is the feedback that we've touched on it already, but in terms of graduating, leaving that educational institution, and similarly, I had a lot more contacts in London than I did locally, and the work that Saw and Reveal have done through all the symposia and all the things that I've been to, it's been fantastic in creating a local network of people that I feel there are people now that I trust to give me honest feedback on my work, and that's without that I think I'd be kind of waving in the dark, really.
Well, I think there is something that really bothers me about being in Somerset, and it's more the kind of attitude towards Somerset as it's not really a very fashionable place to be an artist. I think it's not taken that seriously in a lot of circles, and I think if you're coming from a kind of group and you're kind of supported by networks like Saw and Reveal, you're taken a lot more seriously in general, and I think there are certain attitudes about the type of artwork that's made in Somerset, and certainly I wasn't really aware of anything different before I got involved, before I graduated and got involved with various networks. But I think there is definitely an attitude, and I'm quite keen now that I've been here for sort of a few years. I'm quite keen to help be a part of changing that, and I think it's definitely possible.
I think I'm quite interested now, like that's something I've always been quite interested in, is finding now kind of spaces that kind of relate to the same thing. So aren't necessarily like this, it's not a white cube kind of space, it's something that's different. And it's something, as an artist, it's quite challenging to work with, but it has its own kind of like rawity and character, and
you can respond to it.
Yeah, you can respond to it as an artist, and I think that's something that now, I think as well as being braver in like kind of making work, it's really cool to be, and I think Somerset is key for this actually. I think your studio is a perfect example of like finding unique spaces where you can present that work as well, like bringing people into like spaces that they might not have encountered before and seen as somewhere to actually show work.